Welcome to the Trumpet of the last few days. I'm Stanley Farrar.
I'm Robert Farrar.
And I'm Joshua Farrar. The core reason why we've got to re-record everything we just did, and we're losing a very good chunk of tangents. See,
It's okay, we still have our sines and cosines together.
you can't just redo good tangents either. They're very organic in their
No, you
nature.
can't.
Just trying to redo them ruins the whole thing. But at least now we got cicadas in the background with that. So there's that.
Yeah, whoever says cicadas only come up every 50 years, well, they come up every year. It's just
They never lived in the South. Well, when you take and you go through and you look at the mind-numbing monstrosity that is currently the degradation and collapse of societies, we find that once more we have riots in multiple countries.
You remembered that one pretty well.
One of the
I feel like my football quip wouldn't be as funny this time around, but
about Italian football being a riot.
a cicada.
Robert, that is the individual tag that we can put in this for that is Song of the South.
As the audience can tell, I'm in a different location than I had been previously. Was driven in by the bugs being louder than me.
Yeah, it's starting to bug some people.
I mean, we can still hear little bits of it through Roberts if you want to continue listening to the Song of the South, but it's not nearly as overpowering.
But when we take and we look at the riots, South Africa has definitely shown us a roadmap to how to deal with the riots.
Well, if your roadmap is drawn in smokeless powder and blasted onto the parchment through the barrel of a gun, yeah.
The double up buck roadmap, yeah.
Well, it's proven it works. They opened up with those shotguns, and the crowd dispersed, and they dispersed faster when the civilians were opening up on them than they did with the police.
Well, yeah, because civilians don't care if they actually miss you.
That and the police are probably using rubber bullets.
True.
While the civilians were not using rubber bullets. Burn down my store, I'll show you. Boom.
Hey, I've been saying since the beginning that the method of dealing with these guys is to use the rooftop Korean method.
That did work well.
What's the rooftop Korean method?
For those who don't remember.
Back around in the 90s, there was a series of riots in, I want to say, California-ish. And a series of business and homeowners in Koreatown got up on the buildings of their roofs and shot at any looters that came through their streets and drove them off. Became a bit of a folk legend for a bit. That is the gist of it.
Seems legit to me. Seems legit to me.
Well, there's been the media talks about how there's so many similarities between these riots. in South Africa and the BLM Antifa riots. And they're right, there is a lot of similarities between the two. A
Mm-hmm.
bunch of communists are wanting to take over the country and are burning and looting, and but the big difference is the civilian population are fighting back in South Africa, and they're not allowed to here. After all, when the same thing took place in Texas, and a man leveled an AK-47 at a sergeant in the army, he shot and killed the guy with the AK-47, and now has been indicted for murder by an Austin court. Well, by a grand jury in Austin. And that's a stand your ground constitutional carry state. Clear case
Feeling great
of
sense
self
of loss to
defense.
my joke that was missed in our first draft.
Yeah, it was kind of a well timed joke, but it's kind of hard when we're going through it again to hit the same jokes
True.
unless you write them down.
A little peek behind the curtain to see the overweight Oz behind for the audience. Um, we normally do not. We definitely do not rehearse what these episodes beforehand, and we normally don't even discuss the topics beforehand, so that the reactions and sidebars are as natural as they can be. But because of a mistake I made that made us lose the their portion of the audio, actually technically since I've deleted it now, both portions of the audio of our first draft, uh, we lost quite a lot, and it just doesn't feel right doing the same jokes.
In fact, uh, we're kind of like the squirrel on a cage going round, 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 and we'll probably keep spinning in circles until we finally fall out.
I don't want to be part of a falling out, so
But that's what happens when you go round and round and round in circles, because nothing happens till you on a stop, and then it throws you out in the middle of the street.
Oh my.
So
How
the
many people
socialists
are
have
going
never
to get
figured
who you're
out.
referencing?
Almost none.
Man, that is an old reference. What was it? Late
Yes, it's an
60s,
old
early 70s?
reference, and the guy 70s or 80s, I think. But that it doesn't matter. The guy was proven to be a fraud.
Was he?
Yeah,
Oh well.
he was a good comedian, but he was a lot. But he turned out to be a fraud.
As far as comedians go, he was funny, which was the important bit. If you make your living as being a comedian anyway.
Well, he was making his living as a Christian comedian, and so being a fraud is not a good thing as a Christian comedian.
True.
typically, yeah.
You need to be funny and honest.
Which is a hard balance to hit, actually. Kind of like being enlightening and being entertaining. Like Christian fantasy writers. They are, with the exception of one C.S. Lewis, are notoriously bad. Mostly because they're usually
Well,
just too
I
heavy-handed.
don't. I don't know if you've noticed this, but the majority of Christian movies are boring,
Oh yeah, dreadfully boring, and
and
it's
there's no
really a
reason for it.
shame. The amount of great source material to work with in the Bible is astounding, and they just never tap it
Well, you take
properly.
their attempts to redo C.S. Lewis's works. They have been pretty pathetic.
Well, in
Well,
they've done The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe pretty well. I'll give them credit for that. Um, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader should not be a movie. If anything, it should be like a 1 to 2 season long series. That is an episodic tale if ever I saw one, and should be treated as an episodic tale. Story of the week kind of thing.
yeah.
Um, Prince Caspian, I don't think that makes a very good movie. Just the way the story is structured. I don't think there. I can't think of a way to properly put that to screen. But the silver chair,
Now
that's a
the Night King.
gold mine. I've read too many of his books.
Thing about it is you take Pilgrim's Progress. Pilgrim's Progress would make a great movie, and they've tried it, but they've only done animated,
Well, I don't
and they
think
leave too much stuff out.
I don't think Pilgrim's Progress would make a good movie. I think it's in the series category because there's too much there to put in one single movie. You would have to break it up into a series.
Mm,
And and partially because there are distinct story arcs that are very different from each other that would lend itself well to a series style.
yeah.
Maybe not an animated series, although it's been a bit since I've read it. I feel like if you try
Well,
to make it
they've
animated,
always
it would
that
make it too corny.
they normally do it in an animated setup of about 40 minutes
How on earth
for the whole thing.
do they think they can try to fit that entire story in 40 minutes?
I
There's
don't know.
there is too much symbolism and story and stuff going on in that book to fit into 40 minutes. It's like trying to fit all of Gulliver's Travels into a single movie. You can't do it.
Which they did try.
They no,
That's
They did try.
they have never tried to go beyond a single island for Gulliver's Travels in the form of a movie, which is fine. If they break each island into a movie, that works. But it does not work if you try to put the entire book in a single movie. Too much information.
yeah. Getting back onto the subject,
Now that we've had our own organic sidebar this time.
the in Cuba, where during the riots, there is video of people charging into the stores with bags in order to loot the stores. They've also taken and shown
So
that
you could say they
they're
are
demanding
sacking the
their
stores.
freedom. Yes, they're sacking the stores, but they're demanding their freedoms and waving American flags, and so America is being credited for these riots. We also find that America is being credited for the riots and the protests, not riots, the protests in China.
And what's America doing about any of it?
Absolutely
Nothing.
nothing.
Trying to appease China mostly.
The question is, should America
Um,
do anything
they,
about it?
Well, we definitely shouldn't be
I
trying
don't
to
know.
appease China.
When it comes to the to China, I think we should be taking and strengthening our sanctions, but Biden's weakening our sanctions, making it easier for China to spy on us.
Yeah.
The When it comes to Cuba, the Cuban population in Florida are demanding that America step in and aid the protesters against the federal government. Well, their federal government, their communist regime. And while AOC and them, the squad, are silent, we find that Biden actually has not promised to help them, but he did say that it was something to consider.
Which I'm sure gets him in hot water with his handlers.
I'm sure it does. Um, they they have to take a very strong view, uh, if they're not care because in some areas, because Cuba is a threat. It's right off our southern border, not very far at all. It is a threat to the American mainland.
Mm-hmm. The
And
reason why
with
Russia and China
China,
put so much
the,
resources into it in the first place.
and China is building up along the coast across from the Taiwan Strait, and they're also building up in India on the Indian border. So they're preparing for war. We can't let them take Taiwan.
Yeah. And you'd think that the world would have learned its lesson about trying to appease the unappeasable back in World War II, because that's exactly how Hitler got enough power to keep the war going that long.
Yeah. Well, there's the old statement: if you don't learn from history, you're destined to repeat it.
Well, I'm fond of the alternate saying that history does not repeat itself, but it does rhyme.
The governor of Texas has stated that recently that he's going to take and arrest the Democrat congressmen of the state of Texas that have fled D.C.
Which is
and
about
force
time.
them but he's going to wait for them to return to the state before he arrests them.
So they just have to not return to the state.
Except that
Yeah,
the except that the Texas House has said they're going to return to the state because they voted to force them to return by warrant if necessary.
which makes it to where they will get arrested either way. So the House is actually taking my suggestion, which is to take and arrest them and have them extradited back to Texas.
Which I think is the smart option. I'm a little bit surprised that they actually had the spine to pull it off. I don't exactly have the highest opinion of most politicians.
Yeah, that surprised me as well. Um, but this whole thing of fleeing the state started in the 90s.
I didn't know that.
The
But then again,
Democrats,
I was kind of only alive for
yeah,
half of the 90s.
Yeah. for life or
The
half a
Democrats in
million.
the 90s fled to Oklahoma to avoid from passing a bill.
Now they went to D.C. I guess they figured out Oklahoma wouldn't receive them very well.
I think they were afraid Oklahoma would have taken send them back. But I discovered that by doing some research on a Texas congressman that shares our last name. She was one of those who took and fled to Oklahoma, and she's probably one of the ones in D.C. right now.
Yeah. They do have
Disgracing
a
our name like
tendency of
that.
sticking around far longer than they should.
But as you're looking at these, they're doing everything they can to stop legislation from going through that would prevent corruption in the elections.
Mm-hmm. Well, if they can't rig the
And that's
election, then
true
they
across
can't
the
get
board.
their puppets elected.
And the whole time, YouTube is taking and kicking people off for taking and demonetizing and kicking people off for taking and saying that the elections were rigged when all the evidence supports it.
Well, if YouTube hasn't kicked us off by now, they're probably not going to in the near future.
No, and we're not monetized, so they can't hurt us that way.
Advantage of being invisible to the censors.
The censors can't read us. Quick, slip through the lasers.
The the according to the state government in Arizona, there's going to be huge discrepancies revealed when they reveal the results of the audit, which are great enough to actually show that Biden didn't win Arizona. The 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 Senate in Pennsylvania has taken and demanded a audit done of the election in Pennsylvania.
Now, any one of those
We
alone
don't know
wouldn't be
what kind of
enough to
results
swing the
that will have.
election, but both of them together would definitely swing it.
No, yeah,
Too bad it's too late.
and
Too bad it's too late.
yeah, and and a congressman in Michigan has put forward a deal before the Congress of Michigan for a recount.
That's probably not going anywhere.
It's a Republican controlled Congress, so it might. But
If they haven't managed to fix Flint by now, they're not going to manage to fix their own systems.
yeah. But even so, even if they do the audit and find out that it was rigged, it won't change the fact of who's president. I was explaining that to a gentleman in church the other day, a few weeks ago, that even if they prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that Biden was put in office illegally, he's still in office now.
It will, however, give leverage to pass laws like Texas is doing and remove their justification to flee the state to D.C.
Well, it won't matter for Pennsylvania because Pennsylvania has a Democrat governor.
So does Michigan.
They'll just veto it. They already have vetoed it once. Governor Wolf already vetoed election laws once.
Mm-hmm. But he can be bypassed.
But they
He can only veto it
only
once.
by if they can get 2/3 vote.
Yeah.
and they don't have enough numbers to override a veto.
Now,
But they might after
theoretic.
getting definitive proof that the elections were faulty, because then they've got a bit of a noose around their neck from public pressure.
I mean, if you want to be super technical, constitutionally speaking, it's up to the legislator to decide election, how the manner and place of elections, if I remember, is are the terms used. So,
State legislatures.
yes, yes, which means that the governor technically isn't involved in that process.
That's why they can demand a audit without the governor's permission. And we know for a fact that Pennsylvania violated the state laws in their election as it is.
Yeah,
So
which should be enough reason to impeach their governor.
it should be. Actually, it should be enough of a reason to impeach their Supreme Court.
Well, that too.
Now the Democrats in general are in kind of dire strait. The more that their time goes on, the more dissatisfied their base is. And being they didn't win the election honestly, the rest of the country's not happy with them. So they've got both sides against them.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter as long as they rig the elections.
Well, doesn't
That's
matter in
one
the
reason
short term
why Pelosi's
while they
pushing
rig
so
the
hard.
elections. The more they do it, the more dissatisfaction rises up, and eventually you get rebellion. That's why you have to hide your rigged elections in the first place.
Now they don't believe that America will rebel.
They haven't read our history.
I don't know. We got enough dog-faced pony soldiers.
When you look at our current situation with all the millennials and 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 Z generation, and taking in seem to have a difficulty grasping reality and are holding on to utopian thought processes, is they're pretty easily deceived.
Well, think about it this way, right? Gen Z is easily deceived. However, they're young. Of course they're easily deceived. They're naive. But at the same time, they're impulsive. So they're the most likely group to rebel just because of a perceived slight.
You also have to remember that the college brainwashed kids are always the minority, never the majority.
Yeah, and the
They're
millennials,
just a really loud minority.
the millennials in that regard, most of them have been around. Yes, some of them are still naive, some of them are commie traders, but the grand majority of them have been in the working world for long enough to become disillusioned with the system, and they're discontent with it. As far as Gen X goes, they've been a pretty rowdy bunch for practically their entire existence. The
They've
only
also
group,
been forgotten practically their entire existence.
oh no, they didn't start getting forgotten until the late 2000s, early 2010s.
Until people realized they weren't commies.
Yeah. The boomers are the least likely to rebel right now because they just physically can't. And their livelihoods depend on that social security check.
Get rid of the Ponzi scheme. Save our
Well,
future.
technically speaking, my generation never expected to get a social check.
Which is why they don't really care if it goes away.
And so we take and I think we're the ones most likely to rebel.
Like I said, Gen X has been rowdy for practically their entire existence.
We're children of the '80s and well, actually teenagers of the '80s, and most of us heavily influenced by Reagan.
Yeah. The only reason why they have this
The
weird false sense
Reaganite
of
generation.
security about the rebellion or potential of rebellion is because the baby boomers aren't going to do it because they either are the reason for the situation being the way it is in the case of these octogenarians in Congress and that sort of thing, or their livelihood
Oh, that's
depends
pre
on the
baby boom.
government in the form of social security, or they're just too old to
Baby boom
physically be
didn't start
capable
till
of rebelling properly.
1945.
Do what?
Now that's true. The baby boom didn't begin till 1945.
Yeah.
So the octogenarians aren't baby boomers.
On a
They're
technic
Depression era babies.
on a technicality, you are correct, but they are close enough in age that they are, and the rest of their generation is dying out very very rapidly, that they might as well just be looped in with the baby boomers. They're the ones they appeal to anyway.
I think one of the reasons why the octogenarians are going along with this insanity is because they're afraid of these young extremists that have taken over their party,
Yeah, those ones are primarily
and they're
millennials at this point. The Gen Zers aren't old enough to enter Congress and that sort of thing yet.
no. And from all the statistics I've seen, the millennials are much worse than the Gen Z,
Oh yeah,
even though we're talking a fictitious concept in the first place.
true, but it's useful. It's a useful tool. It's a great
Because
way
they
to
they've
verbally
taken
group in age groups and their tendencies and behaviors.
you figure that used to be a generation was determined by 20 years.
But they keep
So
changing.
those
They keep
who
changing those
were
definitions.
so those who were yeah, they do. So those who are part of the baby boomer generation are from 45 to 65.
Yeah,
Well, 65 is only 2 years older than me.
and from 65 to 85 is the Gen Xers.
Right.
Well, 85 to 2005 is Gen Y or the millennials. I am
Yes.
I am kind of glad that my generation in that regard did not did not carry on with the whole letter scheme. Naming a generation after a letter is boring. Uh, and
Well,
apparently, the
the
Gen
thing is,
Z agree with me because they've been calling themselves Zoomers lately to counter the whole baby boomers and boomers. So,
most most scholars view the cutoff for Gen Y as being around 94, 95.
I know they say that, but that is after they
See,
started
that's only
shifting
10 years.
definitions.
Well, listen, the whole fact they have scholars on this sort of nonsense.
It's like saying that
Yeah.
It's like saying you have a degree in liberal arts. It doesn't mean anything.
Well, you stop and think about it. Traditionally speaking, the term generation would be like I'm one generation, y'all are the next generation.
Yeah.
Or in the term that well, this is the generation in which we live, which
But
would encompass all of us.
that still doesn't change the fact that most people, when they refer to Gen Z, they are going to lump you and me together, Josh.
There are so many spread out definitions that I fall on either side very regularly, and I just stopped caring.
Yeah, it's healthier that way.
Yeah.
Well, you figure that
That and when
some
I
of my
was
cousins, uh,
when we were growing up,
some
no
of my
one
cousins are
mentioned
Gen
anything
Xers.
about Gen Z. Gen Z didn't exist while we were growing
No.
up.
Well, we were told about the possibility of its existence by Dad when we were really little, but nobody else talked about it.
Yeah.
But I was saying though, some of my cousins are baby boomers, some of my cousins are Gen Xers, and we're all the same generation.
Yeah.
Well, it's like, okay, I'm fine actually, kind of, with dividing myself from the Gen Ys, from the millennials. But really, let's be honest. The A lot of people my age are just the siblings of millennials. That's all we are. We're just the younger siblings. So you've got the difference in attitudes between the younger siblings and the older siblings. The older siblings are more likely to be commies. Okay.
Like Matt.
Now I've noticed though that yeah, the thing about it is you deal with the older ones. It tends to be the ones who've been indoctrinated by college.
Yeah.
I haven't met too many communists that haven't gone through college.
I haven't met any who stayed communist after hitting the working world that didn't go through college.
Yeah. Now
And
I'm not saying that everybody who goes through college is a commie because I'm not, and I've been to college, and Robert's not, and he went to college. But still, most of the communists that I know that stayed communists in the working world well, are college graduates.
even then, most of them stop being communists around the time they start looking at how much they're getting taxed.
Now, that's one thing that the government is real sneaky on because people don't realize how much they're being taxed unless they're paying self employment tax.
Yeah.
And even then, they don't entirely understand what they're paying in taxes because
13%. That's how much Sika is. 13%.
and FICA, uh, half of that tax gets paid by your employers. Unless you're self employed, then you pay the whole thing. That's 16%. Then you have whatever tax bracket you're in, and for income tax, and then there's the gas tax. About 75% of what we pay in fuel bills is taxes.
Then there's Social Security,
People don't know that.
and
That's what Sika is.
That's
okay,
FICA.
Sika and FICA are Social
okay,
Security.
okay. Then there is sales tax, and property tax, and death tax,
Yeah.
Inheritance tax.
inheritance tax, gambling
Capital gains
tax,
tax.
winnings tax.
Value added tax for some areas.
Value added tax is not a thing in the United States. That's a British thing.
It almost became a
European.
thing. It almost became a thing in Puerto Rico.
Then you've got homeowners associations and union dues, and by the time you're done with it all, you've got less than 20% of your paycheck left.
But it's okay. You get a full refund from the government for some of it. just some of it.
And that's depending on your tax bracket.
And one thing that's
Federal
been
federal
bothering me
income tax
lately,
can go up to 50%.
one thing that's been bothering me lately is how all these people have been encouraging the tax the wealthy more than taxing the common man. And thinking about it, and I've thought about this quite a bit, they are these people who are doing this argument already know that the wealthy aren't paying as much in taxes as everyone else. How would increasing the percentage they're getting taxed change anything if they still remove everything they're getting taxed? You want to fix that
It's a
issue.
scam.
You don't raise taxes on the wealthy, you close loopholes.
They the thing is that they're taxing on the ability to to acquire wealth. They don't actually tax the wealth.
Yeah.
They they don't tax you for what you got in investments or in the bank until you sell them, or you and the interest on it. They don't tax the actual amount. Um, so for the most part, these multi-billionaires make no money, so
Yeah.
there's nothing to make a tax on.
Well, let's be honest. Most of the time it's a socialist ploy to cap people from being able to gain wealth. Or as they like to think, since they think of everything through a class system, it stops people from rising up through the classes.
Yeah.
Specifically hurting what they view as the middle class.
Which,
The
ironically,
thing,
is technically in the top 10% of earners in the United States. So they're the
yeah,
ones who get all the taxes. The middle class.
the top 10, the top 10% don't pay hardly any taxes because they are the wealthy.
That's the
But
top 1%.
from the
That is the top
Yeah,
1% of
that's the top
wealth.
1%.
okay, that's one.
The top 10%
Okay,
goes into the upper to middle class, and they're only getting taxed like that because they're the highest earners, while your highest owners don't make anything, at least not directly.
it's all through corporate shell companies and
Yeah,
various other things to make sure they don't get any taxes.
yeah. Like I said, the way to do it in the way that most of the laymen understand it anyway is not to increase taxes on the wealthy, it's to close loopholes. That is, of
Speaking
course,
about
assuming that taxing is the proper way to go about it anyway, which I disagree with, but that wasn't the topic of discussion.
speaking about the acquiring of wealth, Tim Pool started up a corporation,
It was a very subversive corporation.
and
It's
yes, that's the
literally
name
called
of it.
Subverse.
Subversive. But the whole point of the corporation is to be is journalism. That was its whole point, to put out news that the mainstream media won't do. And he had two partners in the business. He has 85% of the stock. His another partner has 10% of the stock, and and this woman had 5% of the stock. Well, this particular female took and was making reports about certain individuals putting out information that's illegal to put out and taking and basically defaming people. They told her to cease and desist. She refused. She was ejected from the company. Her another party in the situation was involved with it and was fired from the company. They weren't didn't hold stock.
Hmm.
Well, Tim Pool took and had a meeting called a meeting of the stockholders,
The three of them.
the
Yes.
three of them, and two of them showed up. Well, that's a quorum.
Yeah.
So they held the meeting without her. And that's the meeting they took and decided to remove her, basically to take her stock from her and remove her from the company. And this is all done through contracts. They have contracts giving them the ability to do this.
Hmm.
Well, she held a meeting with. She took when she was kicked out of the company. She took their audio video equipment and editing equipment and took it with her to California.
Hmm.
So she stole the equipment from the company. She also took and misappropriated funds from the bank account. She had access to the bank account.
So she embezzled as well.
Yeah.
And she embezzled, yeah, a couple $1 million.
No, just a million. Just a million.
Just a million.
Just
Yeah.
$1 million.
Well,
And
yeah.
and she met with the other guy that got fired. They held a corporate stockholders meeting and voted Tim Pool out of being the chairman of the board, the CEO, and put this other guy as the CEO, and claimed they own the company. The company's now theirs. Well, Tim Pool's now suing them for $2 million. And she claims that she was protesting the other meeting, and therefore, or his claim that she abstained by not showing up was invalid.
She only owns 5% of the company. She realizes that, right? Or she only
Yeah.
owned. So, between him and the other guy, it's not just a quorum when 2/3 show up, when they've got 95% of the shares there.
Well, there's
Yes.
also in American law, as well as several other. It's the same in Canada, and I don't know about any of the other English-speaking countries. When you're on the board of a company, of a corporation, you have what's called a fiduciary duty. Fiduciary, literally meaning faith. So they have a good faith duty to do what is beneficial to the company that they're on the board of.
Hmm.
By embezzling the money and
And stealing the
stealing the
equipment.
equipment, and actually, just from the fact that they refused to show up to the board members' meeting, was a violation of fiduciary duty and could constitute a civil suit. Just from that one action.
What gets me is I don't understand why he hasn't filed criminal charges on her, unless he plans on doing that after he wins the civil suit.
Hmm. I don't know.
Because what she did is grand theft.
Well, none of us know Tim Pool personally. So in the
No,
end, we can only
never met him in my
speculate
life.
on his motives. But my speculation is the fact that he's a little bit too naive about the nature of the goodness of mankind.
Well, I mean, he is a socialist,
I
and
get that
that's
from
kind of
watching his
par for the
show.
course.
Yeah. I am of the opinion
Well,
that
he's
that
being
he
red
thinks
pilled.
mankind is inherently good, and his actions reflect that. I think he is naive, but I do believe those are his values, and I think that is what is determining
Barnes
his
takes a similar position.
goodness.
Barnes took a similar position, and he actually knows him.
Yeah,
While we've never met him, had no connection to him whatsoever, have had no communication with anybody that even knows him. So
I mean,
we're all just going by the news.
I didn't even know this case existed until you guys brought it up 5-10 minutes ago.
Well, it just
Yeah.
goes to show
But
that people do ridiculous things in this country that make zero sense whatsoever and somehow think they're going to get away with it.
They would have gotten away with it too if it
they
wasn't for those meddling kids.
what gets me is when a 5% shareholder thinks they can take over the entire company just by a fake meeting.
With somebody who's not even a shareholder.
I mean,
Yes.
you kind of got to respect the gall to try.
Makes you wonder if she has a screw loose, though, or something.
True.
She's got to have a few screw loose. And thing about it is that I've heard of several cases like this where people have tried to take over other companies that and they have no say in the matter whatsoever. They just declaring it their company.
I think people just go along with it.
Well, people have taken over other people's houses that way. They've just gone in and declared it's their house. They're now.
Yeah, that's how they get shot.
Uh, yeah. In or well, uh, one one military person who had been stationed in Florida had bought a house, then took and moved to, then was transferred to San Diego. He never sold that house. That was still his house. While he was in San Diego, people broke into the house, changed the locks, and declared it their house. When he came back, was transferred back to Florida, he found these people in his house, and the police refused to remove them because he hadn't taken and sent them an eviction notice. And until he went to the courts and got an
They weren't
official eviction
renters.
notice, they wouldn't. No, they weren't. They were squatters.
An eviction notice only is appropriate when they're renters.
That's when they found out the police didn't know that about a year before that, the Florida Congress had taken and passed a law stating that they didn't have that people with squatters didn't have to get an eviction notice. They could just have them physically removed and jailed.
Mm-hmm.
And it took the local news to point it out to the police, to get the police to contact the Congress and verify that yes, that was the law now, and to do something.
My coworkers have asked me repeatedly why I have no interest in becoming a landlord, and I think that case sums it up quite nicely.
uh, so have gotten it in their heads that if they want something, it's theirs by right,
Yeah.
and they'll go take it. It's all part of that socialist mindset that's infiltrated in our country. So they're so it's like they when they were taking and looting stores in Chicago, one of the Chicago City Council took and stated, "Well, looting is just a means for them to receive, oh, what do they call that? Reparation."
Reparations.
Yes.
It's a twisted
So we
mindset.
can't take and charge them with a crime.
So,
Yeah.
does
So
that mean that you also can't charge me with theft if I break into their homes and take everything they stole and then some? Because
no, because
it's
you're white.
clearly mine by right.
You're not a socialist, and you're white. So no, it
But
won't
what
work
if
for
I
you.
identify as being a socialist female black woman? And therefore, I deserve my reparations, because I am a proud, independent black woman.
Who don't need no man.
Uh, we're getting
Oh,
too far into hypotheticals.
but the thing about it is it's kind of like the when that guy took and exposed himself to the women in the women's changing room, claiming to be a transgender in California, and the the women objected, and a group of feminists organized to protest this particular gym. Antifa and Black Lives Matter attacked them.
Ah, it was a turf war. It's finally happened.
So they talk about the unity among the Democrats, but then the Democrats is made up of these radical, insane groups that hate each other,
Yeah.
and their policies are directly contrary to each other, and there's no way to get them to fit together because they're in direct opposition to each other. You cannot take and have of the transgender agenda being pushed and the feminist agenda being pushed because they automatically clash head on.
Even worse is the
Because
pedophile
the
agenda
feminists,
trying to slide their way into the pride movement.
oh, that's been part of the pride movement from the beginning
Well,
because the
they've
majority of
actually
pedophiles are homosexual.
they've actually split into factions on this one. Um, you you may not have noticed it, but there is the LGBT group, and then there is the ones that are trying to add the pedophiles into it because age is just a number and it's just another sexuality, and they are rabidly fighting each other.
Now, you take that choir from San Francisco that stated they were coming after your kids,
Yeah,
specifically to indoctrinate. Um, the two lead singers that are the most uh, put forward in that choir are pedophile activists. They're homosexuals, but they're pedophile activists. So when they say they're coming after your children and knowing who it's coming from, you can't help but think that they're talking more than just trying to get you to agree to think that homosexuality is okay.
yeah,
They're actually coming after your children.
yeah,
First thought that crossed my mind is that's what a gun's for.
yeah.
Well, if you like today's
We have
episode,
an obligation to protect her. We have an obligation to protect our family.
If you like today's episode and don't have a gun, we do strongly suggest you purchase one. We're not sponsored by any particular gun advocacy group or any particular firearms manufacturer, but we just generally advise it as sound advice. Though you could also feel free to hit the like button, subscribe, and see us in the next episode.